I was sitting peacefully at a table with my 7-year-old grandson during my son's second wedding. All of a sudden, the little boy clutched my hand and whispered, "Grandma, we need to leave this place now." I asked him, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" He shivered and said, "Grandma, you haven't checked my pocket, have you?" I slowly reached into his little suit pocket and my blood ran cold. I took my grandson's hand, and we stood up without a word. I'm so happy you're here to listen to my story. If you're enjoying this, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to see how far my story of justice has traveled. I was seated in the grand hall of the reception, a room shimmering under the glow of crystal chandeliers, right beside my precious grandson, the boy who holds my entire heart. Today was the wedding of my son, Michael, to his second wife, Chloe. My dear little boy, Sam, was quietly running his little blue dinosaur toy over the crisp, white tablecloth. His innocent eyes were lost in his own little world, a place where the chatter of the grown-ups couldn't reach him. I looked at him, and my heart just melted. I reached over and gently adjusted the small black bow tie on his collar, a touch as soft as the memory of his mother, Sarah, whose warm smile I can still see as clearly as if it were yesterday. The gentle sound of a string quartet filled the air, mingling with the hum of conversations and the delicate chime of champagne flutes. The hall was decorated with an almost overwhelming elegance, with centerpieces of white orchids on every table and candlelight dancing off the polished silverware. I looked around, trying to find Michael. He was moving between tables, sharing a toast and a laugh with the guests, his smile bright and wide. But I knew it was a smile trying to cover the deep sadness he still carried since Sarah passed. Across the room, Chloe, my son's new bride, was a vision in her lace-covered gown, posing for pictures with a group of her friends. Her smile was flawless, not a hint of worry, as if she owned the entire world. I watched her and felt a strange knot in my stomach, a peculiar feeling, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was just being an overprotective grandmother. Waitstaff moved silently through the room, refilling glasses, taking away finished plates, and refolding napkins. A sweet-looking older woman at our table leaned over to me with a warm smile. "My, how Sam is growing. How old is he now, Rose?" I smiled back and replied quietly, "He just turned 7. They grow up in the blink of an eye." I then turned to cut a little piece of the wedding cake for Sam. The boy looked up at me, his eyes full of love, but he quickly looked back down and went back to playing with his dinosaur, as if that little toy was his only safe harbor. Then, all of a sudden, Sam stopped. His little hands froze, and his wide eyes looked up at me with a seriousness I'd never seen in him before. A shiver of unease went down my spine. A terrible feeling started to creep in. He grabbed my hand, his small fingers as cold as ice. In a panicked whisper, he said, "Grandma, we have to go, right now." His voice was trembling, like he was trying to hold back a terrible fear. My heart began to pound in my chest. I leaned closer to him, placing a comforting hand on his back. "What is it, my dear? Tell Grandma what's wrong." Sam took a shaky breath, his lips pressed tightly together. And then he whispered so quietly I had to lean my head down to his. "Grandma, you haven't checked my pocket, have you?" His words felt like a shard of ice piercing my chest. A dreadful anxiety started to build inside me, making it hard to breathe. I tried to stay composed and stroked his hair, but his terrified eyes, the look of a frightened 7-year-old, told me I couldn't ignore this. "It's all right, my love. Let Grandma see," I said, my voice trying to sound calm to reassure him, though my own heart was hammering against my ribs. Carefully, I slipped my hand into the small pocket of his suit jacket, feeling the smooth fabric and his little dinosaur toy, and then my fingers brushed against it, a small folded piece of a napkin tucked away inside. It was so small, almost unnoticeable, but finding it there sent a chill through my entire body. Sam pressed against me, his small hand gripping my dress as if I were his only anchor. I could feel his quick, shallow breaths. Every shudder of his little body screamed that something was terribly wrong. I pulled the folded napkin from his pocket with a trembling hand. The people around us were still laughing and talking, but in that moment, my world became silent and small. Just me, Sam, and that awful piece of napkin in my palm. I unfolded it. The dim light from the chandelier above was just enough to make out the handwritten words. Table 8. Make sure the boys' dessert has extra crushed peanuts. Just a few words, but they hit me like a physical blow. I felt the warmth drain from my body, and the air got caught in my throat. Sam has a severe, life-threatening allergy to peanuts, something everyone in our family knows. Even a tiny amount could send him into anaphylactic shock. Who could have written this? Who could be so monstrous? And on my son's wedding day. I squeezed Sam's hand, feeling his little fingers shake inside mine. I stood up so fast my chair nearly fell over, ignoring the startled looks from the others at our table. The older woman who had spoken to me earlier stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with wide, concerned eyes. I pulled Sam into a fierce hug, holding him as if I was afraid he would disappear if I let go. The music and the laughter carried on, but for me, it had all dissolved into a heavy, suffocating silence. Memories of happier times flooded my mind, pulling me away from that glittering ballroom and back to the years when our family felt complete. I once believed my son's home would always be a place filled with joy. But life, like a cruel and sudden storm, had put out that light, leaving behind scars that would never truly fade. I remember Sarah, my first daughter-in-law, like I remember the warm morning sun. Her smile was so genuine and kind. She made me feel as if I had gained a daughter, not just a daughter-in-law. Sarah was gentle in spirit. She never had a harsh word for anyone. She was the kind of person who radiated peace. I still remember those warm, breezy afternoons in our suburban Atlanta neighborhood when I would visit Michael and Sarah's cozy little house. The sound of Sam's laughter, just a toddler then, would fill the backyard as he wobbled after a bright yellow ball. Sarah would be on the porch swing with a bowl of fresh-picked strawberries, a gentle smile on her face as she watched her son. "Mom, Rose, you have to try these peaches I got from the market. They're the sweetest this year," she would say, her voice like music as she offered me a slice. I'd sit with her, talking about flowers and neighbors while Sam played at our feet with his little dinosaur toys. But the most vivid and painful memory is the night Sam got terribly sick. His fever was dangerously high. His small body was hot to the touch, and his eyes were glassy, too weak to even cry. Sarah held him close, silent tears streaming down her face. "Mom, Rose, I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice choked with fear. I sat with her through the night, taking turns putting cool cloths on his forehead, trying to soothe her. "Don't you worry, sweetheart. Our boy is a fighter. He'll be just fine." But inside, my own heart was heavy with worry. I stayed with Sarah until the first light of dawn broke through the window, and Sam's fever finally broke. He fell into a peaceful sleep in his mother's arms. Sarah looked at me, her eyes exhausted and red, but with a small, relieved smile. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I would have done without you." I just held her hand, squeezing it to let her know I would always be there for her and for Sam. I truly believed their little family would have a lifetime of happiness, a beautiful story without end. But then, one terrible afternoon, it all shattered. The phone rang while I was in my garden, tending to my roses. A police officer's voice, cold and detached, came over the line. "Mrs. Miller, I regret to inform you there's been an accident." I don't remember the rest of his words. I just remember my gardening shears falling from my hand and my legs giving out from under me. Sarah was gone. A drunk driver had run a red light and hit her car just a few miles from her home. I stood there in my garden, the world spinning around me. Sarah's funeral was on a gray, drizzly day. The rain fell endlessly, as if the sky itself was weeping for her. Sam, only 4 years old at the time, was in my arms, his little face confused. He looked at all the sad faces, not understanding why everyone was crying. "Grandma, where's Mommy?" he asked in his tiny voice. I held him tighter, fighting back my own tears, and whispered, "Mommy's in heaven now, my sweet boy, watching over you." But my own heart was broken into a million pieces. Michael, my son, stood by the casket, a hollowed-out version of himself, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I knew he was trying to be strong for Sam, but his eyes were empty, as if a part of his soul had left with Sarah. After that day, Michael was never the same. He threw himself into his work, leaving before Sam woke up and coming home long after he was asleep. I knew he was running, trying to escape the gaping hole in his life. But it was Sam, my poor little Sam, who was hurt the most. He grew quiet. His bright eyes often looked sad, as if he was always waiting for his mother to walk through the door. I became his rock. I was there every single day, taking him to preschool, packing his lunches, and rocking him to sleep at night. "Grandma, tell me a story about Mommy," he would ask. And I would, my voice thick with emotion, telling him how Sarah used to sing "You Are My Sunshine" to him, and how she would cut his sandwiches into dinosaur shapes just to see him smile. Every story was my way of keeping Sarah alive for him, and for me. Emily, my sister's daughter, whom I'd raised like my own, became our saving grace in those dark days. With her kind heart and gentle nature, she would visit often, bringing picture books and homemade cookies. Emily adored Sam. She would read to him for hours, help him build tall towers with his blocks, and praise his crayon drawings. "Look, Sammy, your T-Rex is much scarier than mine," she'd say with a bright, genuine laugh. But sometimes, I'd see the way Emily looked at Michael when he came home, tired and silent. It was a look filled with a deep, quiet sadness and something more than just cousinly affection. I saw it, but I never said a word. I think I was afraid that speaking it aloud would shatter the fragile peace we had managed to build. Michael's house had become quiet, the laughter gone. But because of Emily and Sam, a small flame of hope kept burning. I did everything I could to protect that flame. But deep down, I knew that both Michael and I were carrying wounds that hadn't healed. Every night, when I looked at Sam sleeping, I saw Sarah's gentle face, and the ache in my heart would return. The memory of that evening is still so sharp in my mind. I was in my living room, the scent of baking bread filling the air, my heart a jumble of nerves and hope. It was the first time Michael was bringing Chloe over to meet me. I told myself to have an open mind, to see her as the woman who might bring happiness back into my son's life. But I couldn't ignore the feeling of unease that settled over me like a cold fog. That evening, Michael arrived looking different. There was a light in his eyes I hadn't seen since the early days when he was with Sarah. "Mom," he said, a nervous excitement in his voice, "there's someone I want you to meet." I stopped kneading my dough and looked at him, my own heart fluttering with anxiety. "Someone special?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Michael's smile was wide and genuine. "Yes, I think you're really going to like her," he said with so much certainty. I just nodded, wiping my flour-dusted hands on my apron, trying to quiet the worry inside. After Sarah, I didn't think anyone could ever fill that space, not just for Michael, but for Sam and me. And then Chloe walked in. She wore a stylish red dress, her blonde hair perfectly curled, and her lips painted a bold, confident red. Her smile was dazzling, I'll admit, but it felt rehearsed. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice smooth as silk, as she gave a slight, polite dip of her head. I smiled back, invited her in, and offered her a glass of sweet tea. "Your home is just lovely," Chloe commented, her eyes sweeping over the family photos on my mantelpiece, lingering for a moment on a picture of Sarah holding a newborn Sam. I thanked her, but the way she looked at that photo made me uncomfortable. Dinner was an affair I tried my best to make warm and welcoming. I served my famous pot roast, creamy mashed potatoes, and green beans, the kind of comfort food I knew Michael loved. Michael sat beside Chloe, completely captivated. His happiness was so plain to see. "Mom, Chloe is a project manager at my firm. She's brilliant," he said, his voice brimming with pride. Chloe smiled and passed me the gravy boat with a graceful, practiced motion. "Rose, this is the best pot roast I've ever had. You simply must give me the recipe," she said, her eyes sparkling. I smiled and thanked her, but a part of me felt on edge. There was something in her perfect manners, her perfect smile, that felt like a performance. Sam, my grandson, was at the table with us, unusually quiet. He was normally a little chatterbox, but tonight he just pushed his food around his plate, his eyes downcast. I noticed he kept avoiding looking at Chloe, as if her presence made him want to shrink. Chloe leaned over and pulled a fancy-looking lollipop from her purse, placing it by his plate with a brilliant smile. "This is for you, sport," she said in a sugary sweet voice, clearly trying to win him over. But Sam didn't move. He just gripped his fork tightly and turned his head away, not even glancing at the candy. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something like fear, and my heart clenched. Michael started to frown, about to say something to his son. "Sam, what's gotten into you? Chloe brought you a treat." I jumped in quickly. "It's all right, Michael. He's just a little tired tonight. Let him be." Michael sighed but dropped it, turning back to Chloe to refill her glass, eager to smooth over the awkward moment. Emily, my dear niece, was there too. She sat across from me, quietly eating, but I saw her expression harden when Chloe casually placed a hand on Michael's arm. Emily has always been a gentle soul, and I know she loves Michael dearly, but I've always suspected her feelings ran deeper than that of a cousin. When Chloe touched Michael, Emily's hand paused over her water glass, her knuckles turning white for just a second. She said nothing, just looked down and continued eating. But her silence was heavier than any words could have been. I wanted to talk to her, to understand the sadness in her eyes, but I knew it wasn't the time or place. After dinner, Chloe insisted on helping with the dishes, despite my protests. "Please, Rose, let me. You've done so much," she said with that same overflowing charm. I gave in and watched as she went into the kitchen, humming a cheerful little tune as she washed and dried. I had to admit, she was efficient. The kitchen was spotless in no time. For a moment, I thought, maybe I'm wrong about her. But then, when I went back to the living room, I saw Sam sitting on the rug, trying to build a tower with his blocks. Chloe sat down beside him. "That's a very tall tower, Sam. You're a great builder," she praised. But Sam immediately tensed up and pulled away, a look of deep mistrust on his face, as if she were a stranger he wanted to avoid. Chloe shot a quick glance at me, and then forced a laugh to cover the rejection. "He's just a little shy," she said sweetly, but I saw something cold flash in her eyes for an instant. Michael, of course, didn't seem to notice a thing. He was too busy pouring more wine and laughing at Chloe's stories. The evening ended with my son completely enchanted, walking Chloe to her car as if she were the only woman in the world. I stood at the window and watched them go, a heavy feeling in my heart, a feeling that something was very, very wrong. As time went on, Chloe became a regular presence in our lives. One sunny Saturday morning, I was sitting in my favorite armchair, reading the paper, when Chloe arrived, beaming. "Rose, I thought I'd take Sam to the zoo today. Would that be all right?" she asked, her voice full of bubbly energy. I looked at Sam, who was quietly watching cartoons, his face unreadable. "Of course, I'm sure he would enjoy that," I said, forcing a smile. A part of me was hesitant, but Michael was at a conference, and I thought the outing might do Sam some good. Chloe took Sam's hand and led him out the door, and I watched them leave with that same familiar weight in my chest. When they came back that afternoon, Chloe was all smiles. "He had a marvelous time. He loved the monkeys and wanted to see the lions twice," she reported enthusiastically. But when I looked at Sam, I saw a new tear in the knee of his jeans and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He was silent, clutching his little dinosaur, and didn't say a single word about his trip. "Did you have a good time, sweetie?" I asked, kneeling down to look him in the eyes. He just gave a tiny nod, his gaze falling to the floor. I wanted to press him for more, to understand his silence, but Chloe chimed in with her bright voice. "I told you, Rose, he had a blast." I nodded, but another piece of the unsettling puzzle was starting to form in my mind. On another day, while Michael was at the office, Chloe stopped by unannounced. I was in the kitchen making a stew for dinner when I heard her talking to Sam in the living room. At first, her voice was sickly sweet, but then I heard a sharp edge to it. "Sit still, Sam. Don't fidget. You're not a baby anymore. Stop acting like one." I froze, my hand hovering over the carrots I was chopping, and a chill went through me. I stepped out of the kitchen, and Chloe's tone instantly switched back to sweet. "Our Sam is so smart. Look what a long train he's making," she said, pointing to his toys with that radiant smile. But Sam just pressed his lips together and looked at me with an expression that pleaded for help. I forced a smile and said, "Yes, he's a clever boy." But inside, That feeling of dread was growing stronger, like a thorn in my heart. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she just wasn't used to being around children. Sam's 7th birthday is a day I'll never forget. Emily spent the entire morning baking a dinosaur-shaped chocolate cake, Sam's absolute favorite. When she brought it in, with 7 candles glowing, Sam's face lit up for the first time in what felt like ages. "Aunt Emily, it's a T-Rex cake!" he yelled, running to give her a huge hug. She smiled and ruffled his hair. "I made it just for you, birthday boy. Make a big wish." I watched them, my heart swelling with warmth, feeling that our little family still had its light. Chloe was there too, but she just offered a polite clap from the corner of the room, a strained smile on her face. Her only gift to Sam was a quick pat on the head and a happy birthday, sport. I saw Sam flinch slightly at her touch, and my heart ached. I wanted to say something, but I held my tongue, telling myself not to stir up trouble. Another time, Michael took Chloe and Sam grocery shopping. I stayed home, but when they returned, I heard Chloe complaining to Michael. "Honestly, Michael, Sam knocked over a whole display of apples. I was so embarrassed." Michael frowned and turned to his son. "Sam, you need to be more careful. You're a big boy." I saw Sam's head droop, his little hands twisting together, his eyes looking for me. I immediately went to him and put my arm around his shoulders. "Don't you worry, sweetie. Accidents happen." But inside, I was fuming. Why did she always find fault with him? Why couldn't she show him the same kindness Sarah had? One afternoon, when I went to pick Sam up from school, his teacher, Mrs. Gable, pulled me aside. "Mrs. Miller," she said in a quiet, concerned voice, "Sam has been very withdrawn lately. He's not really playing with the other children. Is everything okay at home?" I froze, but tried to brush it off. "I'm sure it's just a phase, Mrs. Gable. Thank you for letting me know." But on the walk home, Sam tugged on my sleeve and whispered, his voice trembling, "Grandma, I don't like it when Miss Chloe comes over." I stopped and knelt down to look into his sad eyes, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed. "Why is that, my love? Miss Chloe cares about you," I said, but the words felt like a lie as soon as they left my mouth. Sam shook his head, a look of certainty in his eyes. "No, Grandma, she doesn't." I stroked his hair, trying to comfort him, but deep down I knew he was speaking the truth. Emily, who had walked with me to the school, heard it all. She turned her head away, but I saw her shoulders slump as if she was carrying the weight of it all. All those little moments, all those warning signs. I had seen them, but I had chosen not to see them. And then, the wedding day arrived. That afternoon, the warm Georgia sun poured through the massive stained glass windows of the old church, casting a golden glow over everything, as if nature itself was celebrating my son's new beginning. I was sitting in the front pew, with my grandson Sam on one side and Emily, my sweet niece, on the other. Sam was quietly clutching his little blue dinosaur, his lips moving as he whispered imaginary roars. I looked at him, and my heart ached with love. Emily, in a lovely lavender dress, sat beside him, occasionally leaning over to whisper something in his ear that made him giggle. "You look so handsome in your little suit," she said, straightening his bow tie. I smiled watching them, finding a small moment of peace in my troubled heart. Despite everything, the bond between Emily and Sam was a constant source of light. Michael, my son, stood at the altar in a sharp gray suit, his face a mixture of nerves and pure happiness. His smile seemed to want to finally close the door on the years of grief that followed Sarah's passing. I looked at him, feeling both proud and deeply worried. I wanted to believe he had found love again, that Chloe, the stunning bride who was now walking down the aisle, would bring him the home he deserved. But every time I looked at Chloe, who was smiling for the cameras, I felt that familiar thorn twist in my heart. Her joy seemed too polished, too perfect. The organ played a beautiful melody, blending with the sniffles of happy relatives. I noticed Sam seemed unusually tense. He kept his eyes on his little dinosaur, refusing to look up. I frowned and leaned over. "Are you all right, sweetie?" The boy just shook his head, his grip on his toy tightening. I wanted to ask him more, but the ceremony was starting, and a family friend leaned over to whisper, "Sam is being so good, Rose. He's such a big boy now. I smiled and nodded, but inside, the worry was a heavy stone. Sam had been so excited about the wedding cake, yet now he looked miserable. From the corner of my eye, I saw Chloe's gaze flicker towards us for just a fraction of a second. The perfect smile on her lips seemed to falter just for an instant before she turned back to the minister. I tried to shake off my unease, telling myself it was just wedding day jitters, but then everything changed. During a quiet moment in the vows, Sam tugged urgently on my sleeve. He leaned in close, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. He clung to my arm and whispered, "Grandma, we have to go. Please, we have to leave now." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "What's wrong, my boy?" I whispered back, trying to keep my voice steady. But the look of pure terror on his face was impossible to ignore. Trembling, he repeated the question that sent a chill down my spine. "You haven't checked my pocket, have you?" His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. I reached into the small pocket of his suit jacket, my hand shaking, and my fingers found the folded napkin. I pulled it out, feeling the whole world fade away, leaving only me, Sam, and that terrible piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly. The sunlight streaming through the window was enough to read the neatly written words. "Table 8. Make sure the boys' dessert has extra crushed peanuts." A few words, but they were like an electric shock that jolted my entire being. I crumpled the napkin in my fist. The music, the vows, the tears of joy, it all felt like a horrible lie. Chloe, in her beautiful white gown, was now sliding a ring onto my son's finger, smiling up at him as if he were her entire world. Michael was looking at her with a radiant smile, oblivious, thinking this was the happiest day of his life. But for me, the entire ceremony was a sham, a beautiful facade hiding a monstrous truth. I squeezed the napkin in my hand until my knuckles were white. Sam, my precious grandson whom I loved more than life itself, had just narrowly escaped a malicious plot on his own father's wedding day. I turned to Emily, who was sitting beside Sam. Her face was etched with confusion and concern as she saw the look on my face. "Keep an eye on Sam," I whispered, my voice barely audible but firm. I knew I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with alarm, and she pulled Sam closer, wrapping a protective arm around him. "What are you going to do?" she mouthed, her face full of dread. I just shook my head, not having an answer, because I didn't know what I was going to do next. I stood up and walked quickly out of the church hall, my legs feeling like lead, but my heart pounding with a furious rhythm, demanding action. In the lobby, I saw one of the wedding caterers, a young man I recognized. His cheerful smile was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I recognized Ben, the friendly young man who had served us drinks earlier. At that moment, I couldn't care less about pleasantries. I walked right up to him, shoved the crumpled napkin in his face, and asked in a voice shaking with rage, "Did you write this?" Ben stared at the napkin, and his friendly expression vanished, replaced by one of pure panic. "Oh my gosh, that's my note," he stammered, his hands shaking. "A woman gave it to me, for the chef. I must have dropped it when I was setting up." His words were a confusing mix of relief and even greater horror. "What woman?" I demanded, my voice rising, my composure completely gone. Ben took a step back, looking terrified. "I don't know her name, ma'am. She was a guest. She just told me to make sure the chef got it." Rage burned through me like a wildfire. "My grandson," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear, "has a deadly peanut allergy. A single crumb could have killed him." Ben's face went white, his eyes wide with shock as he shook his head. "Ma'am, I swear I didn't know. I was just passing along a request. I had no idea." His voice cracked, and he looked as though he was about to be sick. The other staff members started to whisper amongst themselves, looking from me to Ben with worried expressions. I clutched the napkin, feeling its sharp edges dig into my palm. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I knew I had to hold it together. Sam was in there, waiting for me. I had to protect him. From inside the church, I could hear the organ swell as the minister joyfully announced the new couple. The sound was like a cruel joke, a reminder that while a celebration was happening, A sinister plot had almost unfolded. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to get control of my shaking body. I knew I could not let this go. If I didn't do something right now, I would never, ever forgive myself. I walked back into the hall, the napkin still clutched in my hand like a weapon. The reception hall was bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, and the string quartet was playing a cheerful tune. Waiters were moving between tables, serving champagne and appetizers. But to me, it was all a grotesque theater. I looked at Sam, huddled beside Emily. His eyes, full of fear, were locked on me, as if I was his only lifeline. I walked to our table and took Sam's small hand, feeling his cold fingers tremble in mine. And then, fueled by a righteous fury, I stood up and my voice rang out, clear and strong, over the music and the chatter. "Excuse me, everyone. Before we continue, I have something that needs to be addressed." The entire hall fell silent. Every eye turned to table 8, where I stood with Sam by my side and Emily looking on with fierce determination. The clinking of glasses stopped, the murmurs faded, and the only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. I held up the napkin. The scribbled words felt like a death sentence. "Who wrote this note, asking for peanuts to be added to the child's dessert at this table?" I asked, my voice shaking with indignation but loud enough for everyone to hear. A wave of confused whispers rippled through the room. Guests exchanged puzzled looks, shaking their heads. I could feel Sam's gaze on me, silently begging me to make it all go away. Michael rushed over from the head table, his happy smile quickly fading into a look of deep concern. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, completely lost. I didn't answer him. I just smoothed the napkin out on the table and pushed it toward him. "Read this," I said, my voice cold as stone, though I was falling apart inside. Michael picked up the napkin. His eyes scanned the words, and I saw the color drain from his face, his hand beginning to shake. "What is this?" he stammered, looking from me to Sam, searching for an explanation that made sense. Chloe, in her magnificent gown, glided over, her brow furrowed in a perfect performance of confusion. "What's all this commotion? Is this some kind of sick joke?" she asked, her voice soft, but I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. I looked her dead in the eye, my heart a cold, hard knot of anger. "My grandson is deathly allergic to peanuts," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "This isn't a joke. This was an attempt to murder a child." My words hung in the air, plunging the room into a stunned, deathly silence. Jaws dropped. Guests started whispering urgently, their eyes darting between me and Chloe. Chloe let out a practiced, disbelieving laugh, a desperate attempt to maintain her facade. "Rose, please. There's no name on that note. You're going to take the word of a child who found a piece of trash?" she said with a condescending tone, trying to paint me as a hysterical old woman. A few guests started to murmur their agreement. "It must be a mistake. Nobody would do that at a wedding." The blood was pounding in my ears. Her sheer nerve left me breathless. I wanted to scream, to rip that perfect smile off her face, but I had to stay strong for Sam. Suddenly, Emily stood up, pulling Sam behind her, her eyes blazing with a fire I'd never seen before. "That's enough, Chloe." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. And then Emily did something I never would have expected. She stepped forward and slapped Chloe across the face, a sharp, cracking sound that echoed through the silent hall. Everyone gasped. Chloe stumbled back, her hand flying to her red cheek, her eyes wide with shock. She immediately turned to Michael, her eyes filling with tears. "You see? She's always been jealous of me. She's attacking me." Lucy didn't flinch. Her hands were clenched into fists, her voice shaking with rage. "The only evil one here is you. You tried to hurt an innocent boy. At your own wedding." Her words hit their mark. The doubtful looks from the guests started to shift towards Chloe. I saw her composure finally crack. Michael was frozen, his gaze darting between me, Emily, and Chloe, as if he was trapped in a nightmare. "Emily, calm down," he managed to say, but his voice was weak, his certainty gone. The whispers grew louder, a rising tide of suspicion directed at the bride. Chloe tried to regain her composure, but I could see her hands were shaking. "This is slander. Someone is trying to ruin my wedding." Her voice was sharp, but the panic in her eyes was unmistakable. Her perfect mask was shattering. I couldn't stand it a moment longer. The rage inside me erupted. I slammed my hand down on the table, rattling the glasses. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice so cold and furious that it silenced the entire room. "Ben, come here!" The young caterer, Ben, shuffled forward from the back of the room, his face ashen with fear. He looked like a trapped animal, caught between the truth and the horrifying scene unfolding. I held the napkin out to him, my voice trembling but firm. "Is this the note you were given?" Ben nodded frantically, stammering, "Yes, ma'am, that's it. A woman, a guest, gave it to me." He kept his head down, avoiding everyone's gaze. I could feel my blood boiling, but I forced myself to remain in control. The entire room was watching. Chloe quickly tried to cut him off, her voice high and desperate. "He's mistaken. I never saw that note before in my life." But before she could continue, a small, choked voice came from a nearby table. "She's lying." It was Olivia, Chloe's younger sister. She stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Chloe asked me to give that note to the waiter," the young woman sobbed, trembling. "She told me it was a special surprise dessert for the boy. I swear I didn't know what it really meant." A collective gasp went through the room. "My God, I can't believe it." I looked at Olivia, and my heart went out to her. She was just a kid, barely out of her teens, her eyes full of shame and confusion, another victim in her sister's cruel game. Chloe spun around and shrieked at her sister, her face twisted with fury. "Shut up, Olivia! How dare you lie like that to hurt me?" Her voice was shrill, but I saw her lips quivering, the last of her control slipping away. Olivia shrank back, shaking from head to foot, and cried, "I'm not lying, Chloe. I just did what you told me to do." Her words were the final nail in the coffin of Chloe's lies, leaving the entire room in a state of horrified shock. A great uncle of ours stood up, his voice thick with disgust. "To think someone could be so wicked as to harm a child." In the midst of the chaos, Emily stepped forward again, holding Sam protectively, and said in an icy tone, "If you're still going to deny it, I'm sure the venue has security cameras. We can clear this all up in a matter of minutes." Her words were like a death blow. Chloe's face went completely white. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked around desperately for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. Her silence was the loudest confession of all. Michael stood there, frozen, his hand resting on Sam's head, staring in horror at the woman he had just married. His voice cracked as he tried to cling to one last shred of hope. "Is this a mistake?" he whispered, but his eyes, moving from the note to Sam's terrified face, told me he already knew the answer. I saw my son's heart break in that moment, just as mine had. After Emily's challenge about the security cameras, a heavy, damning silence fell over the room. Chloe, the woman I had tried so hard to welcome into my family, just stood there, her face a pale mask of defeat, all her excuses gone. The truth was out, and she was cornered. Michael, my son, walked slowly towards her, his face a storm of disbelief and pain. "Chloe, tell me the truth. Did you do this?" His voice trembled, as if he was pleading with her to give him a reason not to believe it. But I knew, and he knew, the painful truth was unavoidable. Chloe took a step back, a twisted, desperate smile on her face. "You don't believe them over me, do you?" she whispered, her voice breaking, trying one last time to play the victim. It was all their plan to ruin this. I did nothing. But her words were hollow, empty. I looked at her, my heart aching with a mix of pity and disgust. This woman, who I had hoped would heal my son's broken heart, was a stranger, a monster I had failed to see. Emily placed a gentle hand on Michael's arm. Her own voice was thick with emotion she was fighting to control. "Michael, she almost killed your son," Chloe shrieked. "Shut up! You're just a jealous nobody." But Emily stood her ground, trembling with rage but unmoving, a guardian angel for my grandson. "How dare you call me jealous?" Emily's voice was like ice. "Look this little boy in the eye and tell him you didn't try to poison him." Sam buried his face in my side, his small hand gripping my dress as if he was afraid of being pulled into the nightmare. Guests started to get up from their tables. The party was over. Mr. Henderson, a dear family friend, slammed his fist on his table. "This is an outrage! We can't just let this stand!" Murmurs of agreement rose up, a wave of condemnation that crashed over Chloe. Michael finally cried out, his voice raw with pain and fury. "Sam is my son. You tried to kill my son, at our own wedding." His words were a final, fatal blow, and I saw Chloe finally collapse into sobs. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a predator who had been caught. I placed the napkin on the head table and said in a firm, clear voice, "Anyone who would harm my grandson has no place in this family. Ever." My words were a final judgment. Chloe looked up, her eyes full of hate, but I saw the defeat there. She had lost. Hotel security guards approached our group and quietly but firmly asked Chloe to leave the reception hall. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of them said, his voice void of emotion. Chloe looked around for an ally, a friendly face, but found none. Guests were already leaving, shaking their heads in disgust. "Unbelievable," I heard one woman whisper. "How could anyone be so evil?" another said, holding her own child a little tighter. Michael stood there, his hands covering his face, as if he could block out the wreckage of his world. Then, as if all the strength had left his body, he sank to his knees in front of Sam, his voice choked with sobs. "Sammy, I'm so sorry. Forgive me, buddy. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." Tears streamed down his face, and my own heart shattered all over again. I helped Michael to his feet, squeezing his arm. "We stopped it in time. That's what matters," I said, my own voice heavy. This lie had to end. I looked at Chloe being led away through a crowd of scornful faces, and I knew with absolute certainty that she had never been, and would never be, part of our family. In the weeks that followed that disastrous wedding, our family felt like it was suspended in a quiet storm, where the wounds were still fresh and so many questions hung in the air. I felt like I was waking up from a long nightmare, one where I almost lost my grandson, the very center of my world. The story of what happened spread like wildfire through our community. The phone rang constantly. Some people blamed Michael for being so blind. Others just offered their sympathy for Sam, the innocent boy caught in the middle of a wicked game. For me, every call was another painful stab, a reminder of how close we came to tragedy. Michael withdrew into himself. He was no longer the happy man from the wedding. He was quiet and haunted, his eyes full of pain and guilt. The name Chloe was never spoken in our house again. It was like she never existed. I watched my son with a heavy heart, but I knew he needed time to heal, to forgive himself for being so deceived. I didn't blame him. I know love can make a fool out of anyone. But I also knew that our family had to find a way to move forward. I continued to care for Sam, just as I had since we lost Sarah. I made him his favorite meals, macaroni and cheese and chocolate chip pancakes, trying to wrap him in a blanket of love and normalcy. But the person who truly healed Sam's wounded spirit wasn't me. It was Emily. Every morning, she packed his school lunch, taking extra care to make sure nothing in it could ever harm him. She'd draw a little smiling dinosaur on a napkin for him, a small gesture that meant the world. "Aunt Emily, you draw the best dinosaurs," Sam would say, and I'd see a spark of his old self return to his eyes. Every afternoon, Emily would take Sam to the park. I would watch them from my window as she pushed him on the swings, higher and higher, his laughter filling the air. It was a sound I thought I might never hear again, and it was like medicine for my soul. Once he fell and scraped his knee, and Emily was there in an instant, scooping him up, dusting him off, and whispering, "It's okay, my brave little guy. I'm right here." She wasn't just his aunt. She was his friend, his protector, and in many ways, she was becoming the mother he had lost. One night, Sam came down with a bad fever, and I watched Emily sit by his bed all night long. She placed cool cloths on his forehead and quietly told him a story about a little lost star who found his way back home. I stood in the doorway, and I saw Michael watching her too. The look on his face was one of awe and gratitude and regret, as if he was finally seeing what had been right in front of him all along. I didn't say a word, just quietly stepped away, leaving them in their own little world. But a new hope began to grow in my heart, a hope that maybe a real light was waiting at the end of this long, dark tunnel. One evening, during a quiet family dinner, Sam looked up from his plate, his eyes clear and serious. "I wish Aunt Emily was my new mommy," he said, his voice soft but certain. The table fell silent. Emily blushed a deep red and looked down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by her fork. Michael froze, his eyes glistening with tears, as if Sam's simple words had struck a chord deep within his heart. I smiled. I reached over and placed my hand on my son's. "Real happiness, Michael," I said softly, "doesn't come from a fancy wedding dress. It comes from a good and honest heart." Michael looked at me, and then he looked at Emily, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a genuine spark of hope in his eyes. Time passed, and Chloe faded from our lives completely. Sam went back to being a happy, carefree boy, always with Emily by his side. One day, Michael took Emily's hand as they stood in my living room. He looked at me, his voice shaking but steady. "Mom, I know I made a terrible mistake. I was blind, and I put Sam in danger. But I don't want to make another one. I don't want to lose the one person who has truly been there for our family." Emily looked down, a shy but radiant smile spreading across her face. I felt tears of joy roll down my cheeks. "All I've ever wanted, son," I said, my voice choked with emotion, "is for you and Sam to be happy." That night, after Sam was asleep, I sat by my window, looking at the moon. Its gentle light felt like a promise, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, the light will always find a way to return. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people you choose, the people who show up, the people who love you with courage. A new, brighter chapter was finally beginning for my family. After all we went through, I learned a powerful lesson. Life is full of heartbreaking losses and painful betrayals, but true, honest love is the compass that will always guide you home. Family isn't built on appearances. It's built on sacrifice, on courage, and on the simple, everyday acts of love that bring real, lasting joy. I want to remind everyone to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. Sometimes, the smallest whisper, the quietest warning can save a life. It's kindness and attention that pull us out of the darkest nights. The story you just heard was changed to protect the people involved, but the heart of it is true. I don't tell it to pass judgment, but in the hopes that it might help someone else reflect. How many families are hurting in silence? I wonder, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent for the sake of peace, or would you have found the courage to fight for the truth? I'd love to hear what you think, because every story shared can be a light for someone else. Thank you for listening to me today. I tell a new story every single day, so be sure to follow along and click that little bell so you don't miss tomorrow's. I'm sure you'll love it.